So Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer is probably his most divergent film. In terms of the type of film that he's making here, because I think what a lot of people might not know going into this film is that it's mostly, for the most part, it's a courtroom drama, which I found very fascinating. It's a 3-hour courtroom drama in which they kind of market it on the fact that like the big scene is going to be when like the bomb drops and Julius Oppenheimer's atomic bomb comes to life. Like that's going to be like the crowning achievement of the film. The interesting thing, I think, and I don't know how much of a spoiler this will be for you, but the big explosion is just like, it's for the second act. It's directly in the middle of the film, and the real meat of the picture, besides just the visual splendor, is everything that surrounds the development of the atomic bomb and and how Oppenheimer deals with it after the fact. And the film, the way that the film goes about it, like Nolan makes this picture hit the ground running. Like we're not really given too much of an introduction to Julius, who's played by Cillian Murphy, who does like, I mean, like, there's a lot of great talent in this film, but Cillian Murphy really makes this role work. And there's a lot for him to work with here. Like he has to go through like a ton of emotions, a ton of different years for this character, and many different like feelings of anxiety and pressures, and just, feeling empty and hollow at the same time, feeling dread and discomfort and fear and just sadness for like the sins that he's been given here. Which honestly, in terms of like all of Christopher Nolan's films, like this is probably the one with the most meat, because it usually feels like the characters are usually just present to fulfill, like not quite like surface level emotions, but they're more or less there for action. Because the way that I've usually referred to Christopher Nolan's films is that they're like the thinking man's Michael Bay movie, where like like the films are about just, stuff blowing up and action. But there's actually like a little bit of like, like some smarts behind it. And there's actually some pretty good writing and solid themes that are established, and just general good filmmaking, as opposed to, Michael Bay's like weird, shaky camera work. And like looking at Oppenheimer, it's like, it's one of those things where it's just like, usually it feels like the smarts take like a back seat and they kind of have to catch up with the rest of the action here. And here it feels like it's the opposite. It feels like the intensity of like the bomb dropping, is kind of like, more or less like the frosting, and not so much like the cake, if you will, of what is here. Because like the most exciting scenes in the film are not when the bomb drops. Like, don't get me wrong, it's a cool scene when you finally get to see all of Oppenheimer's work come together, and he kind of witnesses this horrific sight, which I love the way that they stage it with like, letting like the sound drop, because of like, how, an explosion in the distance, like it will take a while for like it to carry. So there's this great moment where you just get to observe the fire and just hear Oppenheimer's breath as like the silence overtakes him at witnessing like the horrors that he's created of launching into the nuclear era. It's a good scene. It's very much a good scene. It's not like, like, oh, here's, like the dud of a scene. But the real meat of the picture is where you get to see the conflict that he faces with, dealing with his affairs, both political and sexual, like coming to terms with the terrors that he's unleashed, just the anxiety that courses through his mind, and just all these scenes work so well that it's just like, like the bomb dropping is cool. It's nice, and it'll probably like wake up the audience who's probably expecting a much different film and probably won't be able to stay awake through so much of the dialogue. But yeah, like it does this thing that a lot of films do, where they try to make these eureka moments of like science more exciting and more vibrant. I was thinking back to like there's a film from a few years ago called Radioactive, which was, looking at like the history of Madame Curie, and it tried to stage like these visual elements to make like the discoveries more exciting. Like you could see like the lightning striking in the brain and all that. There are a few scenes like that in this film where Nolan tries to make these, let us inside Oppenheimer's head, and you get to see like his thoughts about, like the atom splitting and particles and, like the mechanics of stars and light and physics, and try to make it both like bold and vibrant, like it's some like, sinister superpower that he's unleashed. It doesn't do too much of that though. Like I was kind of, like the film starts off with that. Like you get to see Oppenheimer when he's just starting out in his career and kind of rising through the ranks and, going to university and kind of rising up through there. And it has a lot of those visuals. And I thought, okay, is this going to be the whole film? Is it just going to be like, Oppenheimer talking about like particles, and it's going to like do a quick cut to like a little bit of like, the loud sound and the, and like the visual effects of, of the atom and stuff like that. There's a tiny bit of that, but it's not reliant on it, because what the film is reliant on is the very quick pacing here and the fast dialogue here. Like the film does not slow down for explaining everything here. Like it immediately jumps into Lewis Strauss trying to get the jump on Oppenheimer. Lewis Strauss is played by Robert Downey Jr. and he does a fantastic job just melting into this role of this guy who clearly has it out for Oppenheimer, and just the moment that he suspects that he has communist leanings, he just jumps onto it immediately. And I love the fact, like, he more or less becomes like a bookend for the film, because like he has a fragile ego. He takes it upon himself. Like he really doesn't like the way that kind of Oppenheimer's framed him in front of like Albert Einstein. So kind of has it out for him. And I like the way that it's framed too. Like every scene with Strauss specifically is filmed in black and white. Like anytime like he's like the central focus of the film, and he's and he's like talking about Oppenheimer and even having like flashbacks, it's all in black and white. Which is actually like a little interesting tech note here, is that a lot of the film was shot in IMAX, and Nolan actually wanted to shoot like the black and white scenes in black and white with the camera, like not as like a post-production effect, like how like other films are like, here's the black and white edition. In fact, I think over on the Criterion channel they're doing like a Johnny Mnemonic in black and white. No, here it's actually Nolan specifically wanted to shoot IMAX black and white, which is never been done before. So you want to look at what trailblazing techniques that Nolan's using here. It's probably in the black and white. And it's fascinating that he would choose, kind of like a courtroom drama. Kinda. It's kind of a courtroom drama. Like we do visit like the test site, and we get to see the explosion. We do venture around the world to different sections, but most of the film is usually in indoor settings, behind like basically like Oppenheimer or Strauss sitting before a committee that's judging him. And it honestly kind of works. Like, I think in the first act, the film kind of like, I don't quite want to say stumbles, but it does go all over the place, where it demands you keep up with it. Like look, we're not going to slow down. We're not going to explain much of these characters. Like we're going to introduce like, Catherine Oppenheimer, played by Emily Blunt, when she comes in, but we're not going to, we're going to like go right into the marriage. We're going to like, it does that thing that a lot of biographical dramas do, where they skip over a lot of stuff to get to the meat of the film. And thankfully, like, because the film is 3 hours long, it's Nolan's longest film to date. It does feel like you get to cover a lot of bases here, which you kind of want to do, because you for a film that's specifically about Oppenheimer, you want to look at him from a lot of different angles, and you get to see like, his political beliefs, his interest in, his interest in different women, his problems with women, his inability to connect, his inability to think about the bigger picture, and his dread with realizing what he's about to unleash on the world. And I want to go back to like when I said like how like Nolan tries to find ways to find make ways to find certain scenes to be more exciting when they could just be people talking. There are a few moments like that. In particular, I want to bring this up like because a lot of people are going to be talking about it. The film's rated R, and there are some sex scenes in it, and the sex scenes are kind of fascinating because they don't feel like standard. They feel like they hold some importance here because specifically there are two. I believe there might be more, but there's two sex scenes that come to mind. There's the first sex scene, I believe with I believe it's with Catherine. I believe there is one sex scene where where Oppenheimer first utters the words, I have become death, destroyer of worlds. Like the scene, the moment you're expecting to say that. He says it during a sex scene, and it comes up again during like kind of like the grilling for like, trying to see if he has communist leanings to try to like, try to like discredit Oppenheimer. There's a moment where he's forced to admit that he did have a sexual affair, and the way that I don't quite want to spoil it, but it's one of the most bizarre scenes, one of the most bizarre and surreal ways to shoot a sex scene at that moment, and the fact that it's shot in IMAX is just all the it's just all the better. So there's a lot of ground that's broken here. Outside of that, in terms of the horrors that Oppenheimer feels here, I love the fact that the film tries to keep it central to just his, more or less to Oppenheimer's perspective. Like we don't see the moment where the bomb specifically drops on Japan. We do see, however, the imagination within Oppenheimer about imagining the death that he's unleashed. So you get to see like his, more or less his imagination about how, experiencing like the light from the blast and remembering it and having it echo in the background and kind of like seeing aspects of like the dead bodies that he's, kind of amassed with this. And so like you do feel like the guilt that he has with this. But I want to kind of want to stress this because I feel like some people might not get this with how the film is framed. The film is not trying to frame Oppenheimer as this kind of like either misunderstood genius or a guy who fully understood, the horrible things that he's done. Like there's a great moment in here where he confesses his sin about, having slept with a woman and that with another woman who's not his wife at the time. And then and then after like, that woman kind of like kills herself, he kind of like tries to like admit to himself like, oh God, this is horrible. Why did I do this? And he doesn't receive sympathy at that moment. When he confesses the truth, he gets the punishment that he deserves here. Like there isn't a moment where it's just kind of like, oh, poor Oppenheimer. Oh, he didn't deserve this. There are moments where you're just kind of like, yeah, he should feel bad about what he's done, from having sexual affairs to being responsible for dropping an atomic bomb. And it's like, and it's one of those things where it's just like, all the warning signs were there because there's other physicists who stress, problems with, working with the military and not feeling comfortable about it. And also not being comfortable with the fact that Oppenheimer has not considered all the angles here and the atrocities that he's about to unleash on the world, that they just won't go forward. Like they give him little warnings, like you don't want to go down this route. You know what's going to happen if you do this, and he does it anyway because he feels like, this is like the progress I've made, and if I don't finish this, someone else is going to. So in a way, like he tries to rationalize it by thinking like he's kind of going to martyr himself by saying like, look, we'll develop it first. And if we show the horrors of the atomic bomb, it'll end the war and everything will be fine. And then the moment that he does the first test, all those like, those rationales wash away. And that's the moment where once he sees those bombs being shipped off, it's like, oh God, what have I done? I've ruined the world with what I'm about to do here. I got blood on my hands. And yeah, and you feel like that dread and that horrible icky feeling, in the pit of your stomach, like if you were responsible for something like this. And even when like the film like goes into, just Oppenheimer imagining a world consumed by nukes and fire, which is like his greatest fear, and which had a certain probability of happening where, if they did develop this nuke, that it was going to blow up the world. Yeah, you feel that way, like especially by like the final scene in the film, which kind of like culminates with like his talk with Albert Einstein. There's this overwhelming sense of dread that just washes over you in that moment, and it's like the perfect way to cap out this film, where you're not just coming to watch the giant explosion, go, oh cool, look at what Oppenheimer made. You're meant to feel like, oh man, Oppenheimer developed something really horrible that's going to affect the world for decades to come, and it's just going to make us all the more terrified of war. And it comes through clearly. And like I said, it helps that the explosion itself is just like the second act for like the big grand set piece, and the rest of the film is trying to stress the point that no, this isn't cool. This is really horrifying. And it really nails that point home. And also, like I said, this film is very fast. Has a lot of very quick dialogue. It jumps around a lot, especially in the first act. Like you go between, Oppenheimer thinking about, how he's going to split the atom, to having concerns about the war, to recognizing the fact that he's Jewish, and, like other, and that Jewish people are, kind of not that accepted during the era. And also having like communist leanings, but trying to stress like political war efforts, trying to be aware, but also, having those political intentions kind of not quite evaporate, but kind of like, get pushed into the background the further that he gets into his work. The way that it builds up through there, like where it's just kind of like Oppenheimer gets blinded by progress, and like the most of like the first act and second act is just like going further and further into progress, and the sexual affairs are kind of like a warning sign to him that you might not have the best insight with what you're doing. And then by the time you get to the explosion, it's all of this, for lack of a better term, dealing with the fallout with what comes with being labeled the father of the atomic bomb. And everyone at play here is great. Like the cast list for this is absurd. Like you have Gary Oldman playing the president here for like a small role, but it's great. You have Jack Quaid playing one of like the scientists here. Brief. He's in the film a lot more than Gary Oldman, but he doesn't have as many lines as you might think. Kenneth Branagh as Niels Bohr. You have Matt Damon as military official. You have Casey Affleck, which is a real surprise in this film, and he actually becomes like kind of like a more like the more charismatic scientist, where he's very like critical of Oppenheimer, and there's aspects of him you can agree with, but but like you kind of feel a little bit more for Oppenheimer in this way. Like he plays Boris Posh, who's very like like a little bit critical, but also very weary of the politics that Oppenheimer brings into his work. Also, of course, you have Emily Blunt as Kitty doing a great job. You have Florence Pugh as Jean. I could go down the whole list. You have Rami Malek. You have so many others. Even I'm surprised to see like James Urbanecki, who few people might know as like Rusty Venture from the Venture Brothers, has a small role in this film as well. Just so many great talents here, and they're all playing their role so perfectly. Just because I feel like this film embraces something that Christopher Nolan does well, but gets glossed over with a lot of his films, which is he keeps the pacing fast and the dialogue quick and intricate. So, and the thing is, like, it's easy to get lost in Nolan's films when he does this, especially with Tenet. the way that, like within his last film Tenet, the way that he tries to like explain the weird time traversing sci-fi about how you're traveling back in time is very fast and very kind of glossed over, and at some points you just kind of got to be, you kind of just got to go with the flow. And there are a few moments in that with Oppenheimer where they're jumping all over the place, which is probably going to be a little bit tough for some people because it's non-linear as well. Like one moment we could be talking about, Oppenheimer attending a communist party where he's talking about his concerns for Spain and asking how he could get money there. And then before you know it, we've jumped back to we've jumped further in time to like talking with Strauss about the current trial where he's trying to stress that Oppenheimer, might be a communist. And even it gets weird because then we get flashbacks within flashbacks, because even when we go back with Strauss and his footage is in black and white, he recalls something else that happened with Oppenheimer, and that footage is in black and white as well. So kind of like the way that the film is framed, like it kind of feels like it's non-linear and we're getting flashbacks within flashbacks. So it very much demands your attention. But I think around like the second act, once you kind of like get used to the flow of it and you're able to keep up with like the quick wit and the fast-paced dialogue, it really does click with you, and you kind of and honestly, like for a lot of people are going to be bored if they're just coming to this expecting like the typical action and explosions that you get in most Christopher Nolan movies. Fair warning, you will not get that in this film. What you will get, however, is a great political drama that doesn't waste a lot of time here. Like I said, very fast paced, and if you can keep up with it, even like within a few moments where it stumbles in the first act, it really does engage you. And the more that you get engaged, the more you get to see Oppenheimer from all these different angles and consider his character and not like him, but feel like that horror that comes with everything that he's done in his life. And it not just the atomic bomb, but like everything, his political intentions, the way that his career got away from him, the way that his many relationships failed, the way that he kind of failed as a father. All these aspects are considered so that you have a more complete picture of a character who just unleashed this horrific weapon on the world. And the fact that you feel that weight by the end of that film, in a Christopher Nolan film of all pictures, where usually like he has solid writing and solid themes, but usually the action kind of overtakes it. Here, everything that he stages with like the courtroom drama aspect and the biographical drama and the dialogue that unfolds is just beautiful to witness in this type of film. And just the way that it hits you hard at certain points with the revelations, that feeling that there's something you can't control, the aspects of having blood on your hands, and even the way that the sex scenes are filmed, it hits you hard, and in a way that I honestly didn't expect from a Christopher Nolan film. So yeah, it's definitely it's not going to be for everyone, because it's definitely like a departure from the type of films that Nolan usually makes. But it's one that I feel really resonates well and taps into something different, so that it feels like, a Nolan film that's trying something new, aside from just, the black and white IMAX footage, which is neat. It was pretty cool to see I did see the film in the film strip, the way that Nolan intended, that he always does. But honestly, aside from there's a little bit like the weirdness of kind of like I heard the film projector and I could see kind of like the flickering nature of the camera that I kind of didn't miss with like the old film projectors, but like the way that it was filmed, it was pretty cool, and I'm sure it'll probably be like a much different experience when I watch it digitally. But yeah, the way that it stands right now, Oppenheimer is probably Christopher Nolan's most divergent film. And if I'm being honest here, it might end up being my favorite film of his over time. I know that's kind of hard to top The Dark Knight, because it's wonderfully shot and everything. But I dare say given enough time, this might actually be my favorite Christopher Nolan film.